Hey everybody, and welcome to TGIK, live from the Heptio studios here in downtown Seattle, Washington. Happy Friday, everyone. It looks like we already have had a lot of folks in chat, so let's start off and let's say hello to everyone. Thanks for joining this week. We're going to be talking about building containers and container images with this new fancy tool called Buildah, and we got some other cool stuff we're going to talk about before then that's exciting this week in Kubernetes, and I've got some cool links and some new goodies for folks to check out unrelated to Buildah that are related to Kubernetes. I'm your host, Kris Nova. So let's see what people are saying in chat. As we all know, this is my legit favorite part of the week. So let me scroll up here. It says, Sean Smith was our #1 this week. Hi, Sean. Happy Friday, everyone. Hope you all had a good week. So Resh says, hi, greetings from Hamburg. Happy Friday, everyone. Hello from San Diego, California. Hey, Peter, good to see you. Justin, good to see you. Decent, good to see you again. Waleed, hello from Saudi Arabia. We have somebody from the Big Apple joining. Evening from Loch Head. I have no idea where that is, but it sounds impressive. We have somebody joining from Guatemala. It looks like Duffy is filling in for George this week on the Heptio official TGIK handle, and he's going to be helping out with us today in the HackMD and some other stuff. Sean says, thanks to Duffy. Good, happy Friday, everyone. More happy Fridays, lots of happy Fridays. Looks like we have somebody from New Zealand. Hello from New Jersey. More hellos. It's good to see everyone. Roy, happy Friday from Toronto. It is a good Friday. It's been a good week. We had really great weather this week, so I feel like everybody was in a really good mood this week, both here in Seattle and in open source. So it was a good, positive week for everyone. So yeah, I've already noticed folks are coming in and making changes to the HackMD, so let's just jump right in and see what's going on there. So what do I want to do? Screen and face. So yeah, every week we do a HackMD, which is a real-time Git Markdown editor that you can join and you can take notes and you can contribute to. Looks like, I'm assuming Duffy is making some changes here in our table of contents, and I've already gone through and I've added some reference links down here at the bottom beforehand, and we'll be talking about a bunch of stuff today, and we're going to drop notes in here as needed, and the goal is for these to ultimately end up back in the Heptio TGIK GitHub repository, which is here, github.com/Heptio/TGIK. And you can come and you can see that for every episode we do, we actually create a new directory. I already created one for this week's episode, which is episode 54 on Buildah, and you can see that this is actually what's in Git right now, and then we're live editing this markdown here that will be merged into the tree upstream. Looks like we have some more hellos. A couple folks from Maine, somebody from Serbia, somebody from Chile, Montreal, from London. So as always, we have people from all over the world, which means it's all different times for everyone right now. So it's interesting because some folks are just waking up, some people are getting ready for dinner, maybe having a drink and getting ready for bed. So thanks for joining, everybody. It's always a pleasure to see so many people from all around the world. And it's 1 o'clock here on Friday afternoon in Seattle, which is where I am. And TGIK is one of the last things I do for the week. I pretty much wrap up this, and then I do my snippets for the week, and then I finish up any last minute things that I have outstanding on my plate, and then that pretty much calls it a week for me. So this is always a really exciting part of my day when I finally make it to 1 o'clock and I get to hang out and talk about Kubernetes with a bunch of cool people every week. So this is exciting. So the first thing we want to talk about is, I guess, let's look at our reference links here. So we have this build without a Docker daemon. I think it's the New Stack who did this. This is just an article. Okay, yeah, this was the New Stack. Hello from India, good to see you. Waleed, did you notice China yet? No, I didn't notice China yet. Welcome from China. Thanks for joining. I think this is the first time, personally, I've ever had anyone join from China, so that's pretty exciting. Welcome. Okay, so this article is, I think, one of the original big hype splash articles that came out around Buildah back in June, and I wanted to call it out because I think this does a good job at explaining one of the big value adds that Buildah has versus Docker. So if you want to come through and read this, this talks a lot about the importance of building a container without the Docker daemon and why folks, the original authors of Buildah over at Red Hat, decided to start this tool. And we're going to get a little bit more into this later, but this is a good read. And I was actually going through and reading a little bit of this article, and that's what kind of helped steer me off in the direction of even doing Buildah this week naturally. So this is where it all kind of started for the week for me. So anyway, this is a good read if you want to come check it out. That's relevant to today's episode. There's a link here in the GitHub Markdown file. So this next one is an article that I found on the Kubernetes subreddit. And at first I didn't really understand what it was. So anytime I don't understand something in cloud native, my gut reaction is I need to go figure this thing out immediately so I can boil it down to like the raw ingredients, and so I can sort of explain it and rationalize it in my own brain as quickly as possible. So I heard multi-cluster controller, and I didn't really know what that meant or what that implied. So I started to scroll through this article. I noticed there was a lot of like clusters are isolated from each other, and there was a lot of like value adds here. Like here are some of the things you get from running multiple clusters, and none of this really explained like what this tool was or what this library was. What did it for me was when I found this link here and I clicked on the multi-cluster controller, we started to look at the software, and that's where, of course, in my mind, things start to come together. And I actually found out that this is a really cool library that allows you to watch objects in multiple Kubernetes clusters and then reconcile those multiple objects at the same time. So this is like a controller or an operator library that would allow you to plug it into more than one Kubernetes cluster and then take action based on the state in those various Kubernetes clusters. And how I kind of came to that conclusion was just looking at the Go here. So yeah, this is my approach to figuring out what something does is read an article about it, it seems too wordy, and then just go find a snippet of Go, and then it kind of starts to come together for me in my brain. But anyway, if you look at what's going on here, this is pretty interesting. We initialize a new pointer to a reconciler, we pass in some empty options. Here we have this slice of two strings, cluster 1 and cluster 2. We call contexts. We loop through those, and for each of those, we watch and resource reconcile object, and we pass in some new pods and some watch options, just like you see with the API builder frameworky stuff that we looked at and Buildah that we looked at earlier this year. And then down here at the end, we have this broader reconcile chunk of code. So it's just, it seems to be a way where you can actually have the same operator listen or be aware of multiple objects in multiple clusters. So it's kind of like federation turned backwards, which is interesting. It's an operator model for multi-cluster, which is exactly what the original article said. But this would seem like a cool library, and of course it's only got 21 stars, so anytime I see a new project, I like to kind of give them a little pat on the back and say thanks for doing something exciting with Kubernetes. So this was pretty cool to look at. So next we have a link to the Buildah repository. So this is just like the GitHub repo that I've been working out of all week, getting ready for the Buildah episode today. This has been around for a little bit longer, and there's some good examples and some goodies in here as well. We're actually going to I already have this code checked out locally, and we're going to dig into this code a little bit deeper when we go into our Golang sort of feature lesson for the day. We're going to talk about some cool stuff that they actually did in the Buildah source code that I think makes a good example. So next we have, this was a really cool one. I was really excited when I saw this thing. So this is a tool called Kubebox. I just found out about it today, and it's a terminal and a web console for Kubernetes. And it looks like there's this link here, kube.sh. And yeah, this is really cool. So this is in your web console, but if you actually go back and look at the sort of terminal console for Kubernetes clusters, you can see you get a very similar look and feel here. And honestly, this was kind of what I had in mind when I started working on Krex, a tool I started working on a couple of months ago in my spare time, but never got around to really finalizing it. And one of the things I started to build into my tool was some incurses scripting or Go library functionality around the C internal library so that I could do cool stuff like this and sort of have like multiple panes and multiple frames on the terminal window. But this is a really cool way to visualize a Kubernetes cluster and actually see what's going on in your cluster and do it all from like the magic of your command line. Or it looks like you can also do it all from a web UI that has sort of the same look and feel. And I bet I would actually be able to plug this into a Kubernetes cluster. But I guess we can do a whole different episode on KubeBox in the future and see what this thing can really do. But this was really exciting, and anytime I see somebody coming together and creating some sort of visual user interfacey abstraction on top of the Kubernetes things that pretty much only needs like a cluster URL and some auth information, I get pretty excited. Because right now we pretty much only have the dashboard or Kubectl as our two options, and I think there's a lot of room and a lot of exciting things we can do other than what those two tools offer. So this was really exciting to see. So KubeBox is a good one. And last but not least, we have this unshare man page. This is mostly going to be some reference material for when we get into the actual source code of Buildah, and we talk about how it's actually creating processes and how it's calling the unshare new kernel feature and what that actually does and what that means. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But a good TGIK episode always references a good man page in my mind. So here is a man page for unshare that we're going to talk about a little bit later. So let's see what our friends in chat are saying, and then we can talk about our Golang 5-minute little Go snippet for the day. So let's see, we have more people joining. Oh wow, we've had quite a few. Let me scroll up here. So hello, more hellos. Hello from Maine. I think we saw Maine. Hello from Montreal. Hi from Paris. We saw China. Hi from India. Johannesburg. Anna Decent says, hey Kris. Let's see, hey Decent. I'm just gonna say hey back. So let's talk about the Buildah source code. So here's my terminal. Actually, let's not start in the terminal. Let's start here at the Buildah source code. So I checked out the source code primarily because I wanted to see how this thing is built. And one of the reasons I wanted to see how it's built is because I was trying to actually get a copy of it up and running. So without going into too much detail of what it takes to build this thing, what I wanted to point out was this really interesting tag in the top of our source code here. That's called, it's this build tag. And let's actually see if we can find the Go documentation on this. Go build tags. Hello from Sweden, good to see you. So let's see if I can actually pull up like the programming language docs on this. Oh, here's an article that our friend Dave Cheney wrote. Let's see what Dave has to say about this. Let me pull this over. Cool. So I think, let's see here. Yeah, this is what we're going to be talking about today, which is these conditional build tags. And basically what these build tags do is they tell the Go compiler, based on which architecture you're compiling your Go code for, which files to include. So this is relevant, especially when you get into tools like Buildah and Docker and runc and various tools that are going to be accessing kernel-level syscalls directly from the Go programming language, because some of those syscalls may or may not exist in the underlying system based on the architecture that they're running on. So part of building a meaningful abstraction would mean that we could create a unified function that you could call via Go that then would have a different implementation based on the architecture underneath. And this little build tag makes that very easy for software engineers to structure their code accordingly. So the example here, and I'm going to kind of pick on Buildah a little bit because as I was going through and learning about the tool, this is one of the unfortunate banalities I discovered. If we look in this package here, in the libpod package root user, you'll see we have 3 files. We have user.go, and then we have user_basic and user_Linux. And if we go and we look at user_Linux, we can see at the top, it just says build tag, and then it says Linux. And if we go and we actually look through this file, we can see there's a couple of different unexported functions here. The one that I wanted to look at was this lookup group for UID and container function. And you can see that it like opens this trooted file, etc password, and loops over it. And this basically is what we're calling the implementation for this abstraction, which is lookup group for UID and container. So this is exciting because if we're running on a Linux system and we're compiling our source code for Linux, the Go compiler is going to come up here and say, oh yeah, we're going to build this thing for Linux and we're going to include this function in the rest of the code as we compile it. Now, if we were compiling for an architecture other than Linux, the Go compiler would then trigger on this build tag in a completely different file. And this build tag says everything that is not Linux. So this would be FreeBSD, this would be Windows, this would be Darwin. These would be all the different architectures that Go supports that are not equal to Linux. And you can see here, if we find the lookup group for UID and container function for any other architecture, all the function does is just return an error. So it creates a compilable bit of code. The code will still run, but if you hit this function, you'll actually get an error if you're running on any type of architecture other than Linux, where it will actually go through and actually perform that task that the abstraction is advertising that it's going to do. How I ran into this little interesting bit was when I was trying to do a Buildah build, which we're going to go into a little bit more of what this means later. And I ran this, and you can see I actually got this supplemental groups list lookup by UID not supported. And I began to go and actually grep through the code and found out that, yes, if you tried to compile Buildah for Darwin, which I did here on my Mac, I was just hitting this error message here, supplemental groups list lookup by UID not supported. So anyway, these build tags are really handy in the Go programming language because they allow you to architect and orchestrate your code to have multiple implementations for the lower level snippets that your Go code might be interested in doing. And then based on how you're compiling in it, it will bring those up and stick them into the rest of the binary for you based on the architecture. So that's like our quick little 5-minute Go lesson of the day. And in case you're ever seeing these build tags and they seem a little bit confusing, just remind yourself that there's just a way to tell the compiler to include or exclude an entire file. And if you look at this user.go, you will notice up here at the top, there's no build tag. And all littered throughout this code, you can see that we're actually calling this function here. So if we take this and we go look in user.go, we can actually go through and see that there's broader level functions that call this internal function, and then this function here will exist depending on if you're running on Linux or anything else. So Adecent says, Kris, could you please say something about your Docker on FreeBSD project? Do you achieve any results? So Adecent brings up a really great question, which while we're here, let's see if I can pull this up really quick. This is an interesting part of Kris Nova trivia that I feel like a lot of folks don't know. But if you actually go to the official Docker on FreeBSD Wikipedia, I'm not sure if I'm still listed on here or not. I, at one point, was listed as a maintainer. Let's see if I can do this. I don't think I'm listed as a maintainer anymore. Maybe this is it here. Docker Hack Day 2017. Yeah, so it was me and Devin and Tyler, and we all got together and we started working on the new Docker port. I'm not sure if I'm still listed as an official maintainer for the Docker FreeBSD port. I think Devin might be still. But anyway, once upon a time, I did do a lot of work on getting Docker to run on FreeBSD. And there is a GitHub repo out there where we went through all of the Docker source code and spent an entire day going through and dealing with build tags similar to the build tags that we see here, where we basically had to go and write new files. Like, to give you an example, if we created a new Go file here, we would call it like user_FreeBSD. .go, and then yes, we would add that to Git, and then in here we would go through and basically implement these functions that are specific to the architecture, and then we would go through and actually write the implementation that would work on a FreeBSD style system. So anyway, to answer your question concretely, Adecent, the FreeBSD project, we were able to do some basic container running at at the hack day that we did at the Microsoft office in San Francisco. The project itself, I can't give an update on. I'm already pretty tied as it is with a lot of open source involvement. But in the future, if I get some more time, I would love to go back to get Docker running on FreeBSD. But more importantly, the one thing that I actually really want to work on that I think would actually be a huge game changer in the industry would be writing an OCI compliant jails implementation, which is basically pretty similar to what Buildah does, which is having a container that sort of persists over time that you can interact with. And we'll see that in a second when we actually start building container images with Buildah. But it might be interesting to actually be able to plug a jails-like tool into the rest of the container ecosystem just by giving it some sort of OCI shim that allows all the rest of the container tools to talk to jails. And then we get all of the benefits of jails, but we can plug them into the rest of the container ecosystem. To me, that's like the match made in heaven. That would be a game changer for the industry. But again, I simply just don't have enough hours in the day to do that. So anyway, that's the high-level update on Docker on FreeBSD and the high-level explanation of build tags in Go. And I guess to complete this file, just for my own sanity here, we're going to mimic the top of this build tag, but we're just going to change it from Linux to FreeBSD. So we would just do that. And then if we did, if we compiled this code with Goose and Gorch, which would look like this, go to the Buildah directory, go source github.com, containers, Buildah. We could do like a Go build, and we could set Go OS equal to FreeBSD, and Gorch, Go Arch, and we could set that equal to whatever we wanted to. And based on those values, we would then include the FreeBSD file that I just defined there. So anyway, Goose, Gorch, build tags that are conditional based on your architecture in Go. That's how all of that works, and that's how you can build Go programs that run close to the same, that are able to span different architectures underneath. Okay, and Kadir says, okay, cool. And Edison says, sounds great, thanks. Cool. All right, so let's actually get into Buildah here and talk a little bit about my journey and how I ended up digging through the source code of Buildah. So to start off, let's see, it looks like folks are just talking about whether or not they can see comments over in the chat right now. I'm going to stick Dave's lovely post here in our HackMD so folks at home can see it. Dave, thanks for all of the hard work you do in blogging and explaining the stuff to folks like us. We really appreciate it. So let's do this. So Dave Cheney's blog on conditional build tags. Paste. Awesome. Okay. And then I guess I can add my FreeBSD stuff if you're interested, but I can do that later. We don't have to do that right now. So anyway, let's go to the Buildah repo, which is here. And so to kind of like paint the history of me trying to get Buildah up and running for TGIK today. Oh, it looks like Joe's like retweeting my stuff right now. Thanks, Joe. I just got a notification on my phone. Anyway, to paint a picture, I wanted to check out Buildah. Like all command line tools, I always prefer to run them on my Mac for a demo. It just makes it a little bit easier, and then I can open up the files locally in my text editor of choice. And depending on the presentation, that text editor sometimes changes. So I went here to Buildah, and I noticed there were some releases. So I came in and I checked out the releases. The first thing I noticed was all we're doing is releasing source code, which is good because we now have a snapshot of the source code for a given release, but it was kind of a bummer because I was hoping to find like a very nice, convenient static binary that was going to work perfectly on my Mac. And I didn't find that, so I kept digging. So I came down here and I found these little pages here, and I said, okay, here's some tutorials. We have a troubleshooting guide, and then, yes, installation notes. So let's go look at installing Buildah. And so off the cuff, you can see that we have some kernel version requirements, which makes sense if you think about what Buildah does is it's building containers. So a container is pretty much a glorified system process that takes advantage of some new features in the kernels like namespaces and unshare that we're going to talk about in a little bit, and C groups. And so in order for those to exist, we need the underlying kernel to be at a minimum version, which they call out that you need version 4.0 for Buildah. And then it talks about how it uses runc, which is a Docker runtime, for Buildah run, which is actually running a container that you can do things with. You can run a process inside of it or jump inside of a shell inside of it if you want to. And then it also uses that for the build using Docker file, which can be abbreviated BUD, B-U-D, which you saw me run just a moment ago. And again, we're going to run a lot of these. You'll be pretty familiar with them by the end of the episode. Ashish says, can this run into Kubernetes pod? Yes, it can ultimately run into Kubernetes pod, Ashish, and that's going to be one of the things we do today on the episode, is taking the world's simplest Go program and the world's simplest Docker file and actually building a container, pushing it to a GCR registry, pulling that GCR registry into a Kubernetes cluster, and then checking out the logs to make sure everything worked. So we'll do that whole end-to-end kind of run through today. We're just talking about the installation requirements so folks get an idea of who and how who can run Buildah, and then how, of course, it's ran. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why this is different and why it's important compared to the Docker build tool as well. So anyway, the Cni requirement, pretty straightforward. Basically, you need to use Cni, and it uses the built-in runc stuff. The package installation. So here is where we start getting off into the weeds. Okay. So if you're going to install Buildah from GitHub, you need to make sure you have all of these packages already installed on your system. And Sen, I'm assuming it's Sen or Sean. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but their comment was, seems Buildah still required privileged container. And yes, that is the case. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment as well. Okay, so if you go through installation from GitHub, you need those packages installed. If you want to run this on Fedora, here's the one-liner that you need. Which, of course, I'm not running in Fedora. I have my MacBook here. So I kept scrolling down and trying to find some Darwin installation instructions. So here's RHEL, here's CentOS, here's OpenSUSE, here's Ubuntu, here's Debian, and then the rest of the installation continues, and I didn't notice anything Darwin related. And so I went and checked out the Buildah source code, which is where we are now, and I went ahead and I pulled up the makefile. And I'll just do this in Emacs really quick. And I grepped for Darwin, and I found, oh, here's this lovely Darwin target. And here's the goose and gorch that we looked at a little bit earlier. So this is starting to look familiar, and this is how Buildah would be compiled for Darwin. And it says goose is equal to Darwin. Then we call go build. We pass in our LD flags here. Our output is buildah.darwin. We give it a handful of tags, and we tell it to build from the command buildah directory. So I'm like, okay, that seems straightforward. So I went ahead and did a make Darwin. And, first time I'm doing it kind of blind, so I kind of held my breath. Actually, looks like this one didn't work. Because I think I needed to do like a dependency, like I think it's make dep or something. Make deps, yeah, okay. Ultimately, I was able to get it to work though. It was pretty easy to get it to compile to Darwin. And then after I had it compiled to Darwin, I tried to actually build a Docker container, and that's where I hit that error that ultimately led to me digging into the source code and discovering that Buildah basically doesn't work on any architecture but Linux right now, although it's sort of stubbed out or the scaffolding is there for other implementations like Darwin. So it might be worthwhile to, if you're interested in contributing to the project, if you wanted to run on Darwin or FreeBSD or any other architecture, you can go through and start to create some of those files like I just described earlier and just demonstrated earlier, and starting to build out a Darwin implementation for our friends over at Buildah. It looks like we have people in chat. It says, well, lead said, it comes in RPM packages for RHEL 7.6 and other related stuff to CRIO, Podman, Scopio. And Mohammed says, hi from Paris. So basically, Waleed is saying that there is some official RPM packages for it if you're running on RHEL. So you can just go ahead and download those RPM packages and get it up and working. Okay, so my MacBook the fan's just kicked on, so hopefully I'm not overloading my CPU by trying to run OBS and do a clone here. But I'm trying to demonstrate that we can actually compile the Darwin binary, but it's not actually going to get us where we want with building container images. So I guess while that is finishing up, we can go back and we can look at the installation notes here. So after I went through this whole journey of discovering that it basically only works on Linux, I then decided that I wanted to just spin up an Ubuntu server in Amazon, and then I can just use that for my demo today. So if we go into the Amazon console, we can actually see that I have a server that I've already kind of gone through the steps and pre-configured with Buildah. So Imrican says, can you compare Buildah with Genuine Tools IMQ? I cannot, because I have never even heard of Genuine Tools or IMG before, but I'm happy to do a TGIK episode on another building tool in the future and give my thoughts on doing a compare at that time after I've actually used it. And if you would like to drop a link to that in the document, we can check it out at a later time. So yeah, we go into EC2, we can see that I should have a Kubernetes cluster and a Buildah AMI, or not AMI, but a Buildah instance that I've already kind of done the noisy work on up and running, which is this top one here. So this T2 small is the Buildah virtual machine we're going to be using, and then we have just a one node TGIK number 54 Kubernetes cluster with a single node and a master. So we can copy this to the public IP here to the clipboard, and we can actually SSH into this virtual machine and see what we have up and running. So SSH Ubuntu at our public address there, and if we look in our home directory, yes, we do have the TGIK repository checked out, and we also have this install shell script. So if we cat out this install shell script, you can see all this is basically copy pasta, or it's just been copy and pasted from these two snippets here. And those worked like a charm. I think the important thing to call out is you need Ubuntu Zesty or Ubuntu Xenial if you want to run in Ubuntu, or as somebody pointed out earlier, if you want to run in Fedora or RHEL, there's an RPM for it already. Is there a link to this week's HackMD? Okay, so Rory, I can help with that. Here is a link to this week's HackMD. Let's see if I can drop this in the chat. Oh, looks like Duffy beat me to it. Okay, so anyway, if you go into the docs here, you pull up the Ubuntu install instructions and you actually run them, this is what you end up with. You will end up with this Buildah directory here, and you can see I just dropped everything into shell script, and Buildah should now be in path. So if I run Buildah, poof, there we go. And then we all know how lazy I am. I went ahead and I did alias b is equal to Buildah, and so that I can just run b today on TGIK, and we can actually really start to motor on this command line tool and see what's going on. Yep, and Roy says thank you, and thank you very much, Duffy, for sharing the HackMD. So let's go back to the installation bits here. Okay, so after you just get the Buildah binary up and running, that's not quite enough. You still have to do some of these configuration files here. Heptio, there's a little delay before the show up in the chat bar. Yes, thanks for pointing that out. Duffy, there is a bit of a lag on my end based on what actually happens in chat. So sometimes it's a bit weird trying to get the timing right, and it might be a moment or two behind, and sometimes it can be quite a long interval between my runtime and your runtime as you're watching TGIK. Yeah, so thanks for pointing that out, Duffy. Okay, so for the configuration files, the first one is this registries.conf, and they give working examples that I were able to get all of these working on Ubuntu. So all I did is I grabbed this configuration file, and I went and I dropped it in etccontainersregistry.conf, and I kind of went through the motions here, and I did mounts.conf, and I did the secconf.json, the policy.json, and I kind of configured all of these according to where they say they should live on the file system. And after I did all that, it actually worked, and I was able to start building containers. So that's where we are today. So we have Buildah in our path with alias is equal to B. We have the TGIK repo checked out, and we have our system configured and tested beforehand with the Buildah configuration bits already up and running, just with the basic defaults. I didn't actually go through and change anything. I just copy and pasted directly from the working examples onto my Ubuntu system, and everything is working. And then I guess for good measure, if folks want to see what I'm running, there's my uname, and then how do I do my, what is it, Lisp? Yeah, Lisp LSB release. No LSB models are. How do you tell which Ubuntu version you're running? cat/etc issue, maybe? There we go. Okay, so there's my kernel. Looks like I'm running 4.4, the AWS Ubuntu kernel, and then I'm running Ubuntu 16.04.5 long-term support. So very, very standard Ubuntu installation here, and this is how I was able to get Buildah up and running on a Linux-like system that we just learned is only the only type of system that does support Buildah right now. So let's go back and see what's going on here. Earlier, I had tried to get this thing running up in Darwin. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to jump out of that. I think we might have the Darwin binary here, maybe not, but either way, if folks want to go down the rabbit hole of compiling for Darwin just to demonstrate that it in fact doesn't work, go for it. I'm going to get out of here and just focus on running this thing in Linux for the rest of the episode. And Imrican says LSB release -a. Got it. Yeah, I knew it was LSB release something. I don't use Ubuntu very much. I'm more of an Arch Linux kind of girl. Excuse me. Okay. So let's talk building a container image with Buildah. And I guess let's even talk about what a container image is in the context of Buildah a little bit here. So let's get into our sort of home base for this, which is going to be the 54 directory here. Yeah. And you can see I have a bunch of files here that I think made it into TGIK. Let's see. TGIK episodes 54. Yes, okay, so you can see I have a Docker file, I have a main.go, I have this shell script, and I have this C file that we're going to kind of be using for various examples here today. Okay, cool. So, and then those are sort of mimicked here on my system as well. I actually just did a git checkout for the TGIK repo here, and I've just been working on the command line all day. So the first thing we want to do is let's just get familiar with the Buildah command line and see what the options are. So to do that, we can just run B. And it's a very basic command line tool. It's real familiar to anybody who's run or written a Cobra command line tool in the Go programming language before. You can see you get all of your subcommands here. You get examples of how to actually form your commands up here at the top, and then you have Buildah and image Buildah. And then down here at the bottom, you have all of these optional flags and global options that sort of tell you how you can start to piece your commands together. So right away, if you've actually ever run Docker before, you can tell that this is a little bit simpler. In other words, there's less subcommands here with Buildah than we would see with Docker. In fact, I think Docker is on the system. Yeah, you can see Docker has all of these subcommands here, and there's even more management commands, and it's a very similar format. So off the cuff, Buildah and Docker solve a lot of the same problems. Now, they do it in kind of two different ways. I think the important thing to call out for Buildah that I mentioned earlier in that new Stack article is Buildah can do all of this, building a container image and pushing it up to a registry and running a container image without having any sort of daemon running on your file system. So this is huge. If you're into CI/CD and you're tired of dealing with the Docker daemon on your underlying host server and making sure that whatever your CI/CD job is can access that daemon, or keeping the daemon up and running, it all of a sudden introduces a layer of complexity for you trying to just simply build a container image. So the beauty of Buildah is if you can just get a Linux system with the Buildah static binary on it, you can go ahead and generate container images pretty quick, and it's much more less complex, and it's at a lower cost to the overall system to just run it with this static binary that will create OCI container images. So we've talked about this before in the past, but I guess it's probably a good time to even mention what OCI is. So the OCI spec is a standard for a container image. So a container is the actual instance of an image, and the image itself is sort of like the snapshot or the representation of an image. Looks like somebody has a comment. It says, I think Enrican was wondering how Buildah compares with image, originally started by Jess Fraz. I was wondering that too. That's another good question. I was actually talking to Jessie about some of this stuff yesterday a little bit. I did not ask her about image. I've never used Jessie's tool image. I think Joe has, so maybe he can, if you guys want to bother him on Twitter, you can get some input from him or even ping Jessie and get her thoughts as well. I'm happy to do a TGIK on Jessie's tool, and maybe we can even get her to join me here in the Seattle office or something, and we can talk about it a little more in detail later. But yeah, I don't know. I haven't used it yet. I'm not that well-rounded. I don't build container images all that much, and if I do, I usually just keep it simple. And Adison says, also there is Caniku from Google. Yeah, I mean, so this is how Cni started, right? I think I wanted to do one of the Cni providers, and this turned into a whole like series of me doing Cni. So if folks are interested in doing a broader compare and contrast against all of the different ways of building containers, this might be the first of many container building episodes where we look at some of these other ones. So yeah, I actually like that idea quite a bit. So maybe we can kind of like let this thing roll and keep it going. Adison, if you wouldn't mind maybe dropping that in chat, we can look at adding some of those other ones into the upcoming backlogs as needed. Cool. Well, thanks for the idea there. So anyway, the open container spec is going to be relevant to all of these tools that we were just talking about, not just to Buildah or Docker, but this is basically a spec that the community has come together and said, if you're going to create a container image, it might as well meet the following criteria. And if you create a container image that meets this spec, you should be able to plug that container image into any tooling that also advertises to accept OCI compliant images as well. So this is nice because with Buildah, we can create a container that we can then get up and running in Kubernetes, just because we know that it speaks the standardized image specification. So this is cool. So if we go back here, we can actually see which images we have in our Buildah registry. And I guess registry is the technically correct word to use here, although probably confusing to folks at home if they aren't familiar with how this whole thing works. So if we do a b images, actually need to run this command, b images, you can see we get nothing back because we don't have any images currently saved on this local system because I deleted them all before TGIK. And we can do b containers, and we can see that we actually don't have any containers currently running on the system, also because I deleted all of them before TGIK. Peter says there's actually a CNCF talk by Matt Ricard, Google software engineer, about building Docker images, a brief comparison of existing tools and reasons behind Canico. Awesome. Peter, if you want to share a link to the CNCF talk into the HackMD, that would probably be good for folks, a good place for folks to find it if they were interested in watching the talk. And I might check that out as well if we actually start doing a deep dive into container and container image building tools. And then I have a feeling if we do a deep dive into container image building tools, I'm probably going to develop strong opinions and then probably go off on a tangent and try to build my own or something crazy like that. So it looks like Heptio has a link in the chat as well. So thanks for sharing, Duffy. Okay, so we know what a container image is. It's the single entity, a snapshot. And we know what a container is, which is a current running or currently dead instance of a container. So from a single image, we can run multiple containers. And then again, container is literally nothing than just a system process that takes advantage of a handful of Linux kernel features that didn't exist until recently. Waleed says another thing, Docker images will show different view than Buildah images. It seems they do not share the same files. Waleed brings up a good point. I'm not gonna, no spoilers because we're gonna get into this a little bit later. But yes, there are some formatting things that we have to be aware of when it comes time with building with Docker and building with Buildah. And then I really wanted to bring up this really good quote. Where's our HackMD? This first article I mentioned let's grep for JSON. This quote here, I really, really enjoyed. Why do we need a big container daemon to basically create the content inside of a directory, tar it up, and then write some simple JSON files with it? Which is basically another way of describing what actually a container image is it's just a very simple way of representing a container that we can guarantee is reproducible. So if you actually want to boil this down to raw ingredients, it's just some content, we tar it up, and we write some JSON files that describe the meta information about it. And then we store that on our local host system, and then all of these command line tools do, like Buildah and Docker, when we run commands like b images and b containers, is it'll actually go and it'll scrape through these directories and actually use those directories as sort of a registry to say what we already have running on the local system. And in the case of Buildah, all of that lives in var lib containers. And in the case of Docker, all of that lives in var lib Docker. And you can go in there and you can poke around and you can see all of these files that actually make up things like containers and images. And that effectively is your Docker or your Buildah registry. So that's where the rubber meets the road in raw computer science terms, container images and containers. Okay, so let's find this documentation that walks us through actually building a container image from a real container using Buildah, and then let's try to push that up to GCR. This is cool because the whole paradigms behind how you would build a container image are different in Buildah versus in Docker. So let's see if I can't find this tutorial really quick, because this was a really good one. Where were tutorials? Here. And I think it's this introduction tutorial here. Yeah, so I kind of went through this a little bit to get a container up and running, and we're going to modify it just a little bit. But to start off, we're going to start off with a command similar to this one here. And we're going to kind of explain what's going on here. So we're here in our TGIK 54 directory. We know we have this shell script called test.shell. And if we run it, you can just see that it just says, welcome to TGIK, and then it's going to hang for, I think, 5,000 seconds and then ultimately exit. And we're going to use that to stick that inside of a container. We might even do a main.go, which just says hello and doesn't even have a sleep yet. So we can stick either of those inside of a container with Buildah. So for us to build a container with Buildah, we're going to run a command that looks like this. And let's see what's going on here. So at the beginning of the line, we're creating this new variable in bash called container. And I'm going to change this a little bit, and I'm going to call this TGIK1. And here we're going to run, we're going to capture the output of this command that says Buildah from Fedora, and we're going to change this to Buildah from, let's do Ubuntu, just to keep everything straight in Ubuntu for the whole episode here. So if we do this, oh wow, okay, yes, this is great. I'm so happy this just happened. Okay, so the first lesson I learned with Buildah was that it only runs on Linux, and I didn't really find that anywhere in the documentation. And the second one is Buildah only runs as root, meaning in order for you to even use Buildah, you have to sudo up for pretty much every command, or it's just simply not going to work. And how I discovered that was pasting one of these errors and then going and digging through the GitHub logs and actually finding some buried comment in one of the Buildah GitHub issues that somebody had mentioned. By the way, Buildah only runs as root. So if you're going to run Buildah, you have to have root access. That's just the way it is. If you don't like it, don't run Buildah. Or pull requests accepted, I think, would be the appropriate response there. Okay, so anyway, now let's try to run this TGIK command again, now that we have sudo upt. And we are running as root permanently. So TGIK1 equals Buildah from Ubuntu. And we'll clear our screen beforehand and run that command now. Okay, and so this is cool because we're actually getting some standard error echoed out here to the screen, but the TGIK variable is going to only capture standard out. And if we echo that out after the fact, TGIK, you can see that we have this thing called Ubuntu working container. And if we run our b containers command again, you can see, aha, we now have our first container record defined in our registry, which remember just lives here in var lib containers. And if we wanted to go explore that, I'm sure we'd be able to find references and IDs and files that sort of start to glue all of this, this line together. So if you notice that I did from Ubuntu here, well, actually I ran it, where did I run it? Yeah, I did run it there. And the parlance here is to append -working container to the from name of the container that we're building. And if you actually go and you look in the documentation, you can sort of see that it talks about Buildah defaults to appending working container to the container's image name. I'm just kind of regurgitating it here in the command line for you so that we're not going back and forth all day. So anyway, we did the echo container move, except for we called it TGI K1. And the next thing it suggests that we do is we do this Buildah run command. And it's like, okay, so I know we have a container running. Have we created an image yet? So if we run b images, you can see that we actually have 3 images that have now presented themselves on our file system. We have Golang latest, and we have Ubuntu latest, and we have test image latest. I don't know, I was doing test image earlier, so maybe this is just overhanging from, yeah, created on October 19th and October 16th. So maybe these are just hanging from earlier that we can see them now that we've created our first container or something. That's interesting behavior. But yeah, so we shouldn't have really created a container image yet. We should only have this working container, which is effectively running. So how we can test and even see if this is running is we can do a ps aux. We can pipe that to grep, and we can say grep -i Ubuntu. And you can see that we should have, or let's grep for Buildah. We should have a process running. Saeed says, well, that's a big difference with image then. Image, big selling point is that you don't need to be root. Yes. Thanks for the comment there, Saeed. So anyway, let's do our containers command again. And you can see we have Ubuntu working container, and it's not currently running. But if we wanted to start it running, we could do that Buildah run command that we just saw in the documentation. So we would do brun, the name of the container we want to run, which is TGIK, TGIK1. And then afterwards, we would tell it the name of the command we want to run inside. So let's just run, we'll run bash so that we get some exciting features in our shell other than just running a born again or a regular shell. We get a born again shell. So anyway, so brun TGIK1 bash. So if we run this, you can see that we have created this mrs Dalloway thing, and we are now actually running in this container. And so let's open up another terminal here, and let's resize this because we want to kind of inspect the system as we're doing things here with Buildah. What was our SSH command? SSH, there we go. Okay, so now we're SSH into that same Ubuntu server. I'll sudo up again, and now let's run this ps aux pipe grep for Buildah again, and you can see that we actually have this process that is Buildah run Ubuntu working container bash, and then you see we have this other process here that is the Buildah OCI runtime, which is I think built on runc. So this is the 2 processes that actually make up this processy that we are running here in a containerized environment. And of course, we can explore this file system that we're on, and you can see that this file system is actually different than this file system here, because we were running in like a container proper, so to speak, and a container with an operating system attached to it. Okay, so that is how you start to create a container and how you can actually run it. Now what's cool is because we still have this container that's considered a working container, we can actually kind of build it over time. So this is one of the similarities to jails, is that the container kind of persists, and you can interact with it over time and actually almost have this sort of concept of like a stateful container that you can build and play with. So, excuse me. You can see that there's like some examples of Buildah installing Java, and you can start to install things on your container and running commands inside your container. But more importantly, what I wanted to demonstrate was these copy and these run commands, which I'm not sure, is there a copy example in here? I thought there was. Okay, I'm just going to do this kind of my own way really quick, and then we can go through and see if folks want to see anything else. Because this is one of the big value adds that I saw when I was messing with Buildah, or Buildah, I should say, which is the ability for you to kind of build a container as you see fit. So here in TGI K54, we have this test.shell file. So we can actually add that file to our container's underlying volume by doing a badd, and we want to say the name of the container we want to add to, which is TGIK. 1, and we want to add test.sh, and let's just go ahead and call that, we'll actually rename it to run.sh inside the container. So if we add that, and then we do our run command again, this is like where the magic happens. We list here, you can see that we actually now have run.sh has been added to this file system. And if we exit it and we run it again, we can actually see that it's persisted and it's still running here. So if we went through and we actually did our sh run.sh, you can see it says welcome to TGIK, and it's going to sleep for 2,000 seconds. Looks like folks are still talking about image. It says, Peter says, for image, you don't need to be root on a local machine, but on containers, it requires cap sysadmin Linux capability, GitHub issue 170, which may have been resolved 11 days ago, shrug face. I'm going to let you folks continue talking about image. I think it's good to bring it up, but I'm going to stay focused here on adding and copying files with Buildah, just for folks at home who are interested in learning about Buildah. Okay, so we've added the run.sh file to our container, and let's go ahead and let's just add another file for good measure. So we can exit out of this. Let's touch a new file, and we'll just say it, exciting TGIK, and we can copy this file instead of adding it, and that's actually going to make a copy of it. So I guess the big difference is the first one you're adding a reference, the second one you're actually creating a copy. So if we come in and we do a Buildah copy, we can copy exciting TGIK, and we will copy that. Let's actually follow our syntax here. Buildah copy, the name of the container, which is TGIK1, this file, and we will just copy it. We'll just call it something.txt. Perfect. And if we go in and we run our bash command again, we should see that we have something.txt and run.sh. And if we, is Emacs on here? No. If we rf something.txt, we exit, you can still see that exciting TGIK is here because we just made a copy of it. So that's kind of the difference between adding and copying files into Buildah. So this is cool because you can now start to piece together your container and inspect it and actually see what's going on. So it's a little more hands-on for folks who are looking at building containers a little more interactively. One of the huge value adds of Docker is the Docker file, because we know that if we have a Docker file that generates a container image for us, it's reproducible. In this manner, if we're actually going through and doing this manually on the command line, there's a chance that you would still get into a situation where somebody had some step that was required to replicate behavior that was not captured in a Docker file or something similar. I think it would be really cool to actually look at how you could start to use Buildah inside of a bash script instead of a Docker file, so that you can actually use bash to create really, really complex logical files that build container images for you, because now instead of actually doing things like copy that you would see in a Docker file, you can actually use bash and interpolate variables or have conditional logic based on the state of the system, and it just gives you a much more mature programming language for constructing an image than the Docker file does by itself, which would be just to write a regular old bash file using the commands that we just saw. So pros and cons there to doing it with Docker files or with the method that we just looked at. Also with Buildah, you can actually parse a Docker file proper. So if we look at this Docker file I have here, it's like the world's simplest Docker file. It just says from Golang latest, add the TGIK directory, and just go ahead and do go run main.go. So if we do Buildah, what is the command I'm thinking of? So B, I think it's run, I want to say, -f Docker file, -t, we're going to call this example. Docker file is the name of our tag. We should be able to, it's not B run, what am I trying to do here? Oh, B bud, of course. So Buildah, BUD, build using Docker file, which is the shorthand here. This is the command we were looking for. And then I'm just doing bud. So B bud, and then you can actually see that we're able to actually parse a Docker file, and this looks very similar to the Docker output that we see with the Docker command line tool. A couple of different steps, and you can see down here at the bottom it's doing some copying, and at the end we ultimately get the signature. And if we come here and we do b images, you can see that we now have example Docker file, latest from October 9th, and it's 797 megabytes. And you see we've got some other files here. October 19th, I'm sorry, created earlier. Okay, so that's how you can create a container image from a Docker file with Buildah. Again, in order for that command to work, your system would have had to have been configured based on all of those configuration files we looked at in the installation notes earlier. Folks still talking about image. Well, Saeed, Buildah uses Docker files as well. I was just showing you that you can do both with Buildah and talking about pros and cons. I think the point I was trying to make with Buildah or any container image building tool is the importance of repeatability. So regardless of if you have a Docker file that looks like this, or if we had a bash, like let's just do this. Let's write a bash file that would basically do this exact same thing, but using Buildah. So let's Emacs, we'll call this Buildah, we'll call it a Buildah file, why not? .sh. And let's just go in and we'll bin bash, and we can paste this, and we'll just comment all these lines out because we're just going to use this for reference. And so what we would do is we would do Buildah from Golang latest. And remember, this is proper bash that we're doing here. So we'll just call this C for container. We'll capture this output. And then we would say Buildah add this directory. Actually, I think the syntax would be like this. C, this directory, and actually we can just even do, we'll just make this really resilient, print working directory to /tgik. And then, I don't know how you would do a Buildah enter the run command. I don't think you would. I think you could just specify that later at runtime. That's a good question. If folks are interested in actually defining the default entry point command for their Buildah container, is there a way to define that using the Buildah subcommands that we're seeing here? So question for anybody at home who's watching, and if not, I can try to look after the episode and see if we can't figure it out. So anyway, then, you know, if we, maybe some optional command to run main.go. Unsure if we can do that yet. So anyway, we save this, and we can actually run that Buildah file, and you can actually see that we're given this little output here, and if we do a b images, we've created this other file, Ubuntu latest, that we just updated right now. Okay, so regardless if you do a Buildah file or a bash script with the Buildah commands, repeatability is important. And as you're looking at CI/CD with building containers, I think these are things that you want to ensure as you're setting up your system, that you're always going to be able to generate a container, and that there's never going to be any sort of chance of human involvement along the way. And I think there's just a greater risk of that with Buildah because it makes it so easy to do this type of stuff from the command line. Enrican says, do building with shell commands generate the same image layers so that they can be cached? I don't know. That's another great question. Okay, so we only have a few, like we're running out of time. We've probably got 15 or 20 minutes left. I want to actually get this thing up and running in Kubernetes. So let's run the container here locally, and then let's push that up to GCR, and let's try to pull that down into Kubernetes. So how we would do that is we would do b containers, and you can see that we have an Ubuntu working container, and we have this Golang working container. Oh my gosh, lots of people chatting. Let's see what's going on. A decent from GitHub. Buildah run is the same as Docker run. Docker file run requires a command. Okay, so that's a decent's basically asking my question about defining a default command there. And Roy says, does Buildah create layers which are actually RO like Docker, or is it a different mechanism? Roy, there's a flag that we're about to look at in about 5 or 10 minutes. That's going to show us how we're going to create the layers similar to Docker so that we can run it using Docker. And I'll demonstrate all that as we get these containers built and pushed up to GCR. Okay, so let's look at the documentation for committing what we currently have. And I'm kind of intentionally doing this in a broken way so that we can look at the -- format flag in a moment. So in order to do this, we're going to sort of mirror this command here. And I think you can unmount this new container, and this is actually, I think, considered best practice, because that's going to stop the container with a mounted volume that's running on your system. But we're going to go ahead and skip straight into the Buildah commit here. So we do Buildah commit, and instead of doing new container, we're going to do our TGIK1 variable, and we're going to call this TGIK1. Okay, and you can see that's now been committed, and if we do b images, you can see we now have TGIK1 latest, which was just created. Adison says it's not a question, it's an answer from issue in the Buildah repo. Oh yes, I know Adison. I'm sorry if that came off the wrong way. I was just saying you were answering our question about the entry point, which is basically it behaves like Docker run, and that using the command line subcommands, you really can't define a default entry point like that because it's always just going to be run at runtime. So thank you for that. That was much appreciated. Okay, so we finally have our TGIK1 latest image here, and if we actually want to run this, we can do a Buildah run TGIK1 latest, and we'll say bash. Oh, do we have to do localhost? Let's see, localhost / maybe not. Why can't I run this image name? Buildah run error reading build container. I think it's trying to find a container, not an image. So you can't really pass in an image, which is interesting. Okay, so I think if we passed in one of these, we would actually be able to get one of these container names. We'd actually be able to do a Buildah run. So that's interesting behavior as well. So anyway, we've committed the image. We have the image. Let's now try to push the image up to GCR. So let's jump into our GCR cloud.google.com. Go to the console here, and you can see that I have this Heptio advocacy project, and then here on the left, we're going to go into GCR. Actually, I'll just go to the top and do it that way. It's a little bit quicker. And then we have this test container, and we're going to create one for TGIK right now. Now that we have committed, let's look at an example push command here. And I already have one here in my bash history, so let's just grab it out of my bash history here, grep for push. Okay, so you can see this is me debugging earlier. I had a Kris Nova test container, and I had this working command here as well. So just to kind of, in the name of saving time, I want to show folks a working command here for pushing this image up to a GCR registry so that folks at home kind of get the nugget of the episode that they're looking for, which is this command here. And we're going to kind of piece this apart with what we have now with the TGIK image we just created. So we're going to do Buildah push -- format is equal to Docker. Now this is like the magic flag here. If you don't have the -- format equal to Docker, you actually create a different image type, and if you try to run that on Docker on a different machine or try to run it in Kubernetes, you're going to get some errors and you're going to have a bad time, specifically because Kubernetes won't actually tell you that it's an image problem, and it'll just say failure. And if somebody wants to see that at the end of the episode, I'm happy to do a quick push and rerun at the end, but we're just going to build a working one right now. So the name of the tag that we want to create, which if we scroll up, we can see that our commit file, where was that? Here is TGIK1. So we're going to say TGIK1, and then we're going to actually pass in the name of our GCR registry, and we're going to call it TGIK1 instead of test container. So this should work, and I can talk a little bit more about how I was able to authenticate with GCR in a moment. Actually, I can do that right now. Why not? So I basically had to do a Docker login and get the gcloud. There's like a gcloud command that you can get. I'm trying to think. There's somewhere where you can find the gcloud push container to registry, and they go through and they say download gcloud and run this auth command for Docker, and it'll generate your auth file for you, and then Buildah just used the Docker default auth stuff. So this is the command here, gcloud auth configure Docker. So I downloaded gcloud, I authenticated with my Google Cloud account, I ran this, and then Buildah, poof, just magically worked, and after I did a Docker, I don't even think I had to do a Docker login. I might have had to do a Docker login, and then Buildah just started to push. So I think it's just reading those credentials in the file system as they are populated by those tools. Okay, so we're authenticated with gcloud and we just pushed it up. Successfully pushed GCR Heptio advocacy TGI K1. And if we go back to our GCR registry here and do a refresh, we should see that, yes, we now have a TGI K1 registry. And if we go and we explore that, we can see that we have this latest tag that we just created. Let's see what folks are saying. Buildah runs in the run Docker file. Podman will run the image. And Adecent says, wow, GPC, interesting. So yeah, Adecent, basically somebody on Twitter just suggested they wanted to see this with GCP and that they were struggling with the -- format equal Docker flag. So that's why I'm just trying to demonstrate it for them really quick here at the end. For container registry, sometimes I use Amazon, sometimes I use Google. Docker Hub's the easiest for me because I'm lazy and I just have Docker on my MacBook. But I'm kind of indifferent about Docker and container registries. I like to just keep it, kind of keep it even and try different ones for different demos just to kind of spread the love and then also to compare and contrast them over time. But today we're using GCR and so far so good. So now that we've pushed our container, let's come off this virtual machine and let's come down to my MacBook here. So like we're coming back down to earth on my MacBook and I'm going to open up a new terminal and I'm going to resize that. And here I'm going to actually try to do a Docker run with that container image that we just put. So this is like the big test, right? Can we go from a Linux virtual machine running in Amazon, create a container image with a shell script, push it up to a registry, and then pull from that registry using just regular old Docker and actually get this container running? So how we're going to do that is we're actually going to do a Docker run. But if we come here, I think we can actually get like the pull command, show pull command. Yeah, this is what we want. So we can just copy this thing. And actually, I don't want to do the pull command. I just want to grab this part here. So we're going to do a Docker run -IT for interactive TTY, the name of the container that we're running, and then we'll just do good old-fashioned bash. And that should work. So unable to find the image. It's pulling from the Heptio advocacy repo, registry, which is now public, and it downloaded it, and here we are in this container on my local MacBook. And we do a list, and lo and behold, there is our run.sh command, and it says, welcome to TGIK, and it's been running for like 2,000 seconds, and it'll sleep for 2,000 seconds. And Ashish says, use the image SHA instead of the tag. Sorry, Ashish, I could have used the image SHA, I'm so sorry. But yeah, I just did the tag because, again, I'm lazy. But what Ashish is saying is you could use this image SHA here, which is a much more secure way of ensuring that you're actually getting the image SHA, or the unique image that we created earlier, and that somebody else hasn't come and created a latest tag and swooped that out from underneath of us. Heptio says another trick is to add the -rm to the run command. Yes, so Duffy brings up a good point, which is if I would have added the ---rm at the end of my run command, it would have actually deleted this once I got done running. Otherwise, I have to go manually delete it as well. So anyway, these are good tips. Thanks for pointing them out. And I just wanted to show that we can actually get this run.sh up and running. So let's exit out of this. And now for like the moment of truth, can this thing run in Kubernetes? So let's do krun. K, again, is alias to kubectl. Kubectl run. So let's do the name of our container, which we'll call TGIK1. The command that we want to run, which is just going to be run.sh. This is new syntax for a lot of folks. Run.sh. Then we want to say the namespace, which we'll just do in the default namespace. Actually, you know what? I'll just won't even say that. And then we want to do --image. And we'll do the name of the image here. And to make Ashish happy, I will go ahead and grab the SHA here. GCR, all the way down here to this next line, A0. And we can pass in our image SHA, and then we run that. And if we do kgetpo, oh, you can see that I've already got one up and running. So let's kdelete deploy test container. This is left over from me tinkering beforehand. Now let's try this again, kgetpo. And you can see, well, that one's terminating. But we want to look at this one, which is TGIK1. Let's actually get the logs here, and we'll follow them. And welcome to TGIK. So we were able to build a container image using Buildah without a Docker daemon in a virtual machine in Amazon, push that up to a GCR registry with the -- format equal to Docker flag, we were able to add the run.sh shell script right there from the command line and demonstrate how you could potentially automate that with a bash script instead of a Docker file. Push that up to GCR. We were able to run it locally on my MacBook and then also get it up and running in a pod in Kubernetes as well, all using Buildah without a Docker daemon. So to go back to Buildah, so that's kind of like in my mind, that's the end-to-end test. Creating a container image, pushing it up to a registry, getting it running in Kubernetes, doing all of that with Buildah. So that's exciting, but let's go back and let's see what else we can do here. And actually, let's just go ahead and demonstrate what would happen if we clobbered, where's our push command? I'm wondering what would happen if we clobbered that image where they neglected to pass in the -- format Docker, so we can actually see what would happen on Kubernetes, the Kubernetes side of things. Am I in the wrong? Yes, here we go. I was in the wrong shell, that's why. So if we do our B push again, and we take off the -- format equals Docker, we'll let this push up, and then all we need to do is just delete that pod. I believe the pull policy should be set to always, and then that should re-pull the image, and then that image should error out. Adison says, Heptio timecode looks dope, thanks. Let me grab some tea really quick while we're waiting for this thing to push. So this is a great example that would demonstrate Ashish's point of why you should always use the SHA. So this SHA here is inherently different than this SHA. Although moments ago, if I would have done a Docker pull on latest, I would have got a working container that was built here. And if I did a Docker pull on latest now, I would actually get a intentionally broken container. So that's why it's best practice to use the SHA whenever you can. So you know you're actually getting the exact copy of the container you're looking for, and that you're not getting a container image that has been overwritten. And Waleed says if you have podman, try pushing using podman. So Waleed, this brings up a good point here, which there's a sort of a sister project called Podman. And I kind of went out of my way to not necessarily talk about libpod or podman in today's episode, just because I feel like I wanted to stay focused on Buildah. But there is another tool, maybe we can do another episode on this as well, where we look at libpod and podman and talk about another interesting thing that you can do with Buildah that folks seem to be excited about. And Waleed, if you have any good getting started links for podman or libpod, feel free to drop those in the HackMD for folks at home. So anyway, let's go back to my local MacBook here, and let's get our pods, and let's actually kill this pod. Now that we know we've pushed a intentionally broken container image up to the registry, kdelete PO. So now if we do kget PO, I'm not sure. Let's delete this whole deployment. Let's see, kget deploy, kdelete deploy TGI K1. And let's just start from scratch because I don't feel like editing the image pull policy right now. So k run, and let's call this TGI K2. Bam. And now let's do kget pods. And you can see this one, kget PO. Oh, it's because I'm running the SHA, that's why. That's the problem. Ashish, yeah, I was actually just seeing if Ashish totally made a comment there. Yeah, the image SHA saved me. So the fact that I did that a second ago is actually saving me right now. So let's delete this kdelete deploy TGI K2, and let's reform this command and do TGI K3. Oh, this is too funny. Okay, so TGI K3, and let's delete this whole big long SHA. And we're gonna go heptio.advocacy TGI K1, and we're gonna say set that to latest. There we go. Now if we do kget PO, yes, error image pull is the error we're getting. So kget PO, TGI K3. Actually, what am I trying to do? Not kget PO. I want to kget or klogs this -f. And you can see for the logs, it says container TGI K3 in pod is waiting to start trying and failing to pull image. Okay, so this is the error that Kubernetes is going to give us, and then I can go and do an entire episode on debugging pods in Kubernetes. That's kind of out of scope for today. But basically, the point I'm trying to make is without that -- format equal to Docker flag, or without configuring your Kubernetes server to support the Buildah container image by default, you can get into a little bit of trouble here if you don't actually create a Docker standardized image like we did with Buildah a moment ago. So that's the lesson that somebody asked for on Twitter, and that's what Kubernetes will do if you actually try to run it without that format equal Docker flag. So anyway, let's run Buildah again, and let's see if there's anything else we want to talk about. Oh, there is something I want to talk about. So I was going to get a little bit off in the weeds talking about this, not unmount, unshare, and what this whole unshare thing is, and talk about why that's relevant around containers. And, you know, we're already an hour and almost 20 minutes into the episode, so I can do a quick little review here and just sort of like talk about what unshare is and why it's important. And why we do that. If folks want to ask any questions or see anything else, why I have the system up and running, feel free to ask in chat. And then we'll call it a day after I kind of go through this unshare stuff a little bit here. So the first thing I want to talk about is this unshare command. So if you actually have a Linux system, you can actually run unshare. And if you run unshare, it looks like pretty much nothing happened. But what's exciting is you can actually exit out of that, and you'll see that we went back to root. And so we actually created a new process, a new shell running in a different namespace that was mirrored off of the host namespace, the namespace that we started in. And that's the sort of unshare mentality here. And if you actually run unshare the Linux command, you can do help. You can see that you can unshare different types of namespaces. You can unshare the PID namespace, the user namespace, or even the network namespace. Without going into the details of how the kernel works and what all these different namespaces mean, it's just basically more elaborate ways of you controlling how your processes are ran and what they do and don't have access to and how memory is shared between them. So if you actually look at the Buildah command, you can see that there is this unshare command here, and it says run a command in a modified user namespace. So to give an example of doing this with Linux, you would do unshare, and let's just run shell, and you can see that we have the shell, and we can exit out of it, and we're back to the previous process. And with Buildah, you could run b unshare shell, and we effectively get the same behavior here. Now this is cool because in order for you to actually build a lot of the container libraries and a lot of the image building libraries, you really have to go and get off in the weeds with managing different namespaces and actually interacting with the kernel on that level. So that's probably one of the reasons why Buildah only runs on Linux, is because the Linux kernel is sort of the champion of the container namespace features. So it's going to make it inherently easier to build this type of stuff on a Linux environment. So anyway, what I wanted to show folks was actually how easy it is to implement this in the C programming language, so that folks get an idea of what's actually going on with tools like Docker and Buildah, and how they're actually implementing some of these namespace features and these built-in system calls and these built-in pieces of functionality like unshare. So I found this really great C example online, and it's really simple. I promise we're not going to talk too much about C, but if we actually cat this unshare.c file out, actually let's open this up in Emacs, unshare.c, you can see here we have a lot of boilerplate up here at the top. We've defined a few very important constants, which is clone new C group, and this is added in Linux 4.6. And if you scroll down here, you can see we're just parsing some command line flags. And then down here at the very bottom, we actually call unshare, and we pass in some flags. And then we either do a fork or we don't do a fork, depending on the flags that were passed into the C program. And so this unshare command is actually linked in our show notes here somewhere, unshare man page. And you can actually go and read about this here, and it says unshare allows a process or thread to disassociate parts of its execution context that are currently being shared with other processes or threads, which this is one of the fundamental building blocks of creating and running a container. So we've demonstrated that Buildah has this built-in capability, that Docker has this built-in capability, and now we actually showed a very simple example in C of how you would actually unshare a process. So let's go ahead and compile our C code. I'm going to do GCC -O. We're going to call it unshare TGIK, and we're going to say it's unshare C. And now we can run unshare TGIK sh, and look, we get the exact same behavior that we got with regular unshare, or I'm sorry, regular unshare here. Oh my gosh. let's start over. Sudo bash. Okay, let's do all three of these. Let's do unshare sh. Okay, now let's do the tgik unshare sh. Okay, and now let's do the Buildah unshare sh. Okay. So regardless of if you're coming in through the Go programming language, regardless if you're coming in using good old-fashioned C and calling the function directly, or regardless if you're using Buildah's abstraction, these are core building blocks for creating and maintaining containers, and that's how the whole container building thing works. So that was just my local example to sort of demonstrate that it's not as complicated as you think it might be, and to encourage folks to start to explore this stuff a little bit more and learn more about it. Okay, so that's unsharing a process in Linux, and that's the Buildah, building containers and building images and pushing them up to a registry. Does anybody else have any questions or anything else they would like to see while I am here with all of my systems pulled up and everything kind of in place and up and running and configured and authenticated? I'm happy to do a quick demo. Otherwise, it's almost been an hour and a half, so thanks for joining TGIK. And let's do a couple minutes here at the end to say goodbyes and let folks ask questions. It's always a little bit of an overhang, so I always try to kind of pull back a few minutes early, say goodbye, start saying goodbye, give folks a chance to say goodbye, and fill these last few minutes of the episode with some sort of content. I think sometimes I'll talk about my weekend. Boring, nothing's changed. I'm gonna go climb a mountain as per usual. I think my girlfriend's coming with me, so that's exciting. And we might get a dog soon. We're waiting to hear back about a puppy later today. So those are like my big exciting life updates, and would love to hear about your use cases for Buildah, your use cases for Docker, and of course, if you like the idea of going through and digging through all of the container image building tools, we can totally start a series, and I'm happy to go through and do a compare and contrast like we did with Cni as well. Sean Smith says, have a good weekend. He says, how are the cats? Okay, so the kitties are really good. For folks that don't know, since my girlfriend moved in, we now have 2 cats. Mr. Darcy, who's the best cat in the world, and then his sister, Kylie, who is literally a demon and will draw blood for a required blood sacrifice at least once a day from your legs. And I love them both very much, and they're my favorite kitties in the world, and I'm usually not a cat person, so I feel like that's saying a lot. And then, yes, Duffy says dog photos, so hopefully we'll have some dog photos. Waleed says, thank you, Chris. Have a nice weekend, everyone. Waleed says Buildah for CI/CD. I think that's, that's one of the good takeaways. If you want to look at the advantages of Buildah and why it is the way it is, it does simplify the CI/CD process. And I think that was one of the big value adds that the folks who created Buildah were hoping to solve with the tool. So if you're doing a lot of container image building, and you're struggling with Docker and the Docker daemon, maybe check out Buildah. It might make things simpler for you and your team. And I just gave you a quick rundown of how actually you can do that and still get your containers built in the same way that they were built using a Docker CLI tool. So Peter says thank you. Adecent says have a great weekend. Thanks Chris from Gift. Adecent says thanks Chris and Duffy. So thanks for joining, everyone. Ashish says, thanks, Chris. What kind of dog are you getting? So we're looking at rescuing another Australian Shepherd Border Collie, which for folks at home who knew Charlie before he passed away earlier this year, he was an Australian Border Collie, and he was just a big pain. So hopefully we're trying to find another dog that's going to be just as annoying as Charlie. And if we're lucky, we're going to get this puppy that's super cute, and we're going to rescue them from a horse ranch down in Texas. Roy says CI/CD under root. That's a really good point, Roy. That would be one of the blemishes in running Buildah for your CI/CD system, is that you would have to run it using root, which obviously there's a lot of vulnerabilities and security concerns there, just blindly running commands as root. Pros and cons, just stuff to think about. As always with any engineering and technical decision, figure out what makes sense for you and your team. Understand the risks associated with any and all technical decisions, and make one and see if it works. And experiment and gather data and make things repeatable. Ashish says Bazel can do this without root. Yes, that's another good point. Is Google has a tool called Bazel that allows you to build containers. You don't need to run it as root. Anyway, I'm gonna get out of here, folks. Hit us up on Twitter if you have questions. Ping me on Slack. Shoot me emails. Whatever. And then next week we can maybe look at doing some other container building tools. Okay. Have a good weekend, everyone, and happy Friday.